Wow, that was an incredibly detailed and emotional story. It's about a woman named Maggie who has given so much to her granddaughter, Cassie, only to feel betrayed when Cassie sells her precious heirloom jewelry. As Maggie grapples with the betrayal, she ultimately makes a powerful decision to reclaim her life, sell her home, and find peace and independence. The story explores themes of trust, loss, redemption, and self-discovery. Maggie's journey is one of letting go of the past, healing from deep wounds, and finding strength in herself. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Maggie stood in front of her antique vanity, running her fingers along the worn surface of the oak wood. The room felt cooler tonight, the air stiff with the kind of quiet only a house filled with memories could hold. She'd been meaning to organize, maybe even clear out some of the clutter. But instead, her gaze kept drifting to the small wooden box resting in the corner of the vanity, nestled between the vanity mirror's carved frame and the lace doily her mother had sewn years ago. The box had always been there, a constant, silent keeper of the precious things she had inherited, things that connected her to the past, to a time before the weight of the world had pressed its thumb on her shoulders. The heirloom necklace her mother had worn every Sunday, her wedding band that had outlasted her marriage, delicate brooches that had belonged to Maggie's grandmother. The box was small, but in its simplicity it held the most treasured pieces of her life. But tonight, when Maggie reached for it, she felt a cold rush of emptiness. It was gone. Her heart skipped, a flutter of unease rising in her chest. She ran her hand across the surface again, as though it could reappear if she only touched it long enough. The dust around the box was untouched, as if it hadn't been moved in years. But the box itself? Vanished. Maggie's breath quickened, a small tremor traveling through her fingertips. She had to be mistaken. Had she moved it? Maybe she had put it elsewhere. She checked the top drawer, her nightstand, even the closet shelves where she kept other odds and ends. Nothing. Only empty spots stared back at her. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting Cassie to appear from the hallway, breezing through the door like she usually did. But it was quiet. Too quiet. The house seemed to draw in its breath, holding on to the weight of this new discovery. She couldn't push the thought away. Cassie had been in here earlier that morning, sorting through things, her eyes bright and distant. Maggie's stomach turned. She walked down the hall, her slippers making soft whispers on the hardwood. Cassie was in the kitchen, her back to the door, scrolling through her phone. Maggie stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her granddaughter, the silence of the house amplifying the tension between them. Cassie. Maggie's voice was quiet, but sharp, like a blade wrapped in velvet. Have you seen my box? The one with my jewelry? Cassie turned, a slow smile stretching across her face, almost too practiced, too quick. Your box? She placed her phone down on the counter, wiping her hands on the hem of her shirt. I haven't touched it, Grandma. Why? Maggie's eyes narrowed just slightly, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Cassie's eyes were wide with just the right amount of feigned innocence, almost offended, but not quite. Her granddaughter shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. Oh, I see. Maggie nodded as though she understood. Well, if you do, let me know. I'll be in my room. Cassie gave her a tight smile and turned back to her phone, the quiet hum of the kitchen settling around them. Maggie lingered for just a moment longer, the unease still stirring in her chest like a storm brewing just below the surface. That night, as the house fell into a quiet rhythm of creaks and whispers, Maggie sat at her desk, a small leather-bound notebook before her. It had always been where she kept her inventory, a list of every piece of jewelry she owned, cataloged and organized in meticulous detail. Her mother's pearls, her grandmother's engagement ring. Each item had its place. Maggie opened the notebook, her hands steady but her mind racing. Her eyes scanned the familiar pages until they landed on the entries for the pieces that were now missing. She'd catalogued each one over the years with a kind of reverence. Now, the pages seemed to mock her. 2 more pieces were gone. Her pulse quickened. She flipped back through the previous entries, her fingers trembling as she searched for anything out of place. A sapphire bracelet, a delicate chain with an emerald pendant. Gone. Her breath caught in her throat as she closed the notebook with a snap. She felt the first spark of anger begin to rise in her chest. She hadn't been mistaken. She wasn't imagining things. Cassie had taken them. But she wasn't ready to confront her just yet. Not now. Maggie stood up, closing the safe with deliberate care. Cassie was gone for the night. She had no idea what her grandmother was about to do. Maggie picked up the phone and dialed June's number, her fingers moving with the precision of someone who had been through far worse. The phone rang twice before June's voice came through. "Everything okay, Maggie?" "No," Maggie replied quietly, her voice a soft but firm whisper of resolve. "It's time we talk." The morning light filtered weakly through the kitchen curtains, casting pale, fragile shadows across the table. Maggie didn't move, not yet. Her fingers rested on the edge of the phone, the cool glass surface almost mocking her stillness. She hadn't slept much, her mind spinning with the images of the missing jewelry, each one flashing in her mind like a wound she couldn't stop reopening. It was early, but she knew June would be up by now. She needed answers, and June was always her anchor. The phone rang once, then twice, before the familiar sound of June's voice broke through. "Morning, Maggie. What's on your mind?" Maggie exhaled slowly. "I need you to help me find something." "Of course. What's going on?" Maggie hesitated, then said it plainly. "Cassie's been selling my jewelry." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a brief silence that spoke volumes. Then June's voice came back, steely and sharp. "I'll be right over." Maggie clicked the phone off and set it down. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she held on to the stillness, the quiet anger simmering beneath her skin. The pieces were falling into place. And now it was time to face the full picture. June arrived within the hour, her silver hair a halo of calm defiance. She didn't knock, just let herself in, as she always did. The door swung open and she strode into the kitchen, taking a sharp breath of the morning air as she glanced at Maggie. "You need a plan," June said, her voice low, "and you need to see what you're up against." Maggie didn't reply, just slid the phone across the table to her. June looked at it, her eyes narrowing as she swiped across the screen. Maggie hadn't even told her what she'd found yet, but she knew June would immediately understand. It was just how they worked. The account was easy to spot, hidden behind an alias that left no trace. An anonymous vintage resale account with thousands of followers. The listings were full of jewelry, glistening rings, necklaces, bracelets. But Maggie's eyes didn't miss the details, the descriptions, estate items, heirlooms, precious vintage. It didn't take long before June found the first one. The necklace, Maggie's mother's heirloom, the one she'd worn every Sunday for years. It was there. She couldn't breathe for a second, her chest tightening. "That's her," Maggie whispered. "She's been selling them." June scrolled further, her finger pausing over each item, each description that matched Maggie's collection perfectly. A sapphire bracelet, an emerald pendant, her grandmother's brooch. All gone, all sold. Maggie clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. "How long has this been happening, June?" "Months," June replied, her tone as tight as Maggie's. "Look at the dates. Most of these posts go back weeks." Maggie's throat tightened. She thought she'd been vigilant, but she hadn't seen it. not until the pieces were gone. Without saying another word, Maggie clicked on each listing, watching the sold icon pop up beside each image. Her wedding ring was the final blow. There it was. Her ring. Her marriage. Gone. Her fingers were numb when she clicked on it, staring at the listing, as though if she blinked, it would all go away. But it didn't. The image of her ring, cold and detached from its history, was a wound she couldn't ignore. She closed her eyes for a moment, holding on to her composure. Then, as if to break the stillness, the front door creaked open. Cassie was home. Maggie turned slowly, but not enough to show anything in her face. She didn't want Cassie to see the storm building behind her eyes. She had learned over the years that her granddaughter could read her too well, and Maggie wasn't about to let that happen now. Cassie breezed into the kitchen, humming a tune under her breath, like she hadn't a care in the world. Her eyes flickered over the table, but she didn't linger. Instead, she went straight for the fridge, grabbing a bottle of water and popping it open. "Morning, Grandma. You sleep well?" Maggie's voice was steady. "Cassie, I was just going through some of my things." "Oh?" Cassie's smile was too bright, but Maggie caught the edge of uncertainty in it. "What things?" "Jewelry?" Maggie said, her voice even. "Do you happen to know anything about the box of jewelry that went missing?" Cassie's eyes widened, just for a moment, and then quickly returned to their usual playful indifference. "Oh, I told you I didn't touch it. Why? What's wrong with the box?" Maggie didn't flinch. "I think you know exactly what's wrong with the box, Cassie." Cassie froze, her hand hovering over the fridge, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second. Maggie felt the weight of the silence between them, the knowledge settling in, and for the first time in a long time, Maggie didn't need to say more. Just then, the doorbell rang, a sharp intrusion into the tense moment. Maggie stood, her eyes never leaving Cassie's face. She walked toward the door and opened it to find Derek standing there with a stack of papers in his hand. He gave her a polite smile, though it was tinged with something unspoken. He had seen the cracks in the house long before they appeared. "I've got the repair bill for the plumbing," Derek said, handing her the papers. "You'll need to sign here." Maggie took the bill from his hand, but it wasn't the plumbing work that mattered. She signed it without a word, her eyes flicking back to Cassie in the kitchen, still pretending that nothing had changed. The silence hung thick in the air, heavier now. Cassie's eyes darted nervously between Maggie and the door, but Maggie didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. She turned away, leaving the question unasked. Cassie would have to face the truth eventually. The house was unnervingly quiet that morning. Cassie had left for brunch, as she always did on Sundays, her laughter and the clink of coffee cups already receding down the street. Maggie stood by the window, watching her granddaughter's car disappear into the distance, the weight of the moment settling heavily on her shoulders. She hadn't confronted her. Not yet. She wasn't sure if she ever would. Instead, she turned away from the window and moved toward the kitchen, her steps measured, deliberate. Cassie had no idea what Maggie was doing behind the scenes, no idea how meticulously her grandmother was dismantling her life, their life, piece by piece. Maggie sat at the table, her hands hovering over her phone. With calm precision, she began to make the necessary calls. First, the utility companies. She requested the transfer of electricity, water, and gas into her name. Every account was to be moved, every service adjusted. She would no longer be tied to this house the way she had been before. Next came the insurance. Maggie pulled out her file, the one with her policies neatly stacked and secured in a worn leather folder. She amended the coverage on the house. The moment everything was finalized, Cassie's name would be gone from every document. Maggie's fingers lingered over the next number on her list, the bank. It wasn't that Maggie expected Cassie to be stealing money, but the accounts that tied them together, the ones that made the house feel like it was still home, needed to be untangled. She had spent years consolidating everything into one account, trusting Cassie to handle small things when Maggie couldn't. But trust, Maggie had learned, was easily eroded. She dialed the number, her voice steady as she spoke to the representative, finalizing the transfer of all accounts into her name. "Everything is done," she murmured to herself as she hung up the phone. A breath of release and finality filled her lungs. Meanwhile, June had been busy as well. She had already started showing the house. Quietly, without yard signs or fanfare. Maggie had asked her to keep it discreet, and June, always the loyal friend, had complied. The house would be sold in the background, while Cassie stayed blissfully ignorant of what was coming. As Maggie sat back, surveying her work, the front door opened again. Cassie was home, but Maggie barely registered her arrival. She was too focused on the plans that had already begun to unfold. The movers were scheduled for the next day. The larger furniture would be moved into storage, and the personal belongings that mattered to Maggie most would be packed away. But today, Maggie had other things to do. She stepped outside, the air crisp with the first hints of autumn. The cemetery wasn't far, just a short drive past the rolling hills and old oak trees. It had been months since she'd visited her son's grave, but today she needed to go. She needed to reconnect with the one person who had never turned on her, the one person who had always appreciated what she'd done for him. Maggie placed the flowers carefully by the stone, the bright colors standing out against the muted gray of the headstone. She knelt beside the grave, her heart tight, but not with sorrow. She had learned to live without tears. There had been enough of those in her life. She whispered softly, barely audible to anyone but herself. She chose the easy lies. The words weren't meant for her son. They were for herself. Cassie had chosen the easy path, the one of deceit and self-interest, and Maggie had paid the price for that. The wind shifted, and Maggie stood slowly, brushing off the dirt from her knees. She felt a strange sense of peace as she made her way back to the car. It was time to come back to the real work. Back at the house, Derek was waiting. He had been working for Maggie for years, always reliable, always quiet. He didn't ask questions, just did what she needed. Today, it was the attic. Maggie had given him clear instructions. The valuable items stored up there, her late husband's military medals, her mother's china, everything would be moved. Derek didn't blink, just nodded when she gave the orders, knowing exactly what she meant. As Maggie walked back into the house, she saw Derek coming down from the attic, a stack of boxes in his arms. He paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her, the weight of the moment hanging between them. "I'll take them to storage," he said, his voice soft but knowing. "Good," Maggie replied, the word almost coming out as a whisper. The silence in the house felt heavier now. The house was already slipping away, and soon, so would Cassie. Maggie could feel it in her bones. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about taking back what was hers, what had always been hers. Her peace, her dignity, her sense of self. Cassie would understand soon enough, but Maggie wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing when. Not yet. She stood still for a moment, staring at the boxes Derek had brought down. The house was already starting to look empty, quieter, like it was being stripped of its identity. But Maggie didn't flinch. She was ready. The offer came sooner than Maggie had expected, though she knew it was only a matter of time. June was always sharp, always a step ahead, and she didn't waste time. When Maggie answered the phone, June's voice was crisp with barely contained excitement. "I've got a buyer, Maggie, a young couple moving down from New York. They love the place. They're offering cash, full price." Maggie didn't hesitate. "Accept it." Her decision was swift, almost mechanical. She had already made up her mind. There was no room left for sentiment or second-guessing. This house, this life with Cassie, was no longer hers to keep. She had lived in it for years, but now it was a prison she was breaking free from. Cassie was off at her usual Sunday brunch with friends, her social media always full of perfect snapshots, mimosas in hand, flawless outfits, exaggerated smiles. Maggie didn't even need to check her phone to know that Cassie would post something about being so grateful to live rent-free. Her words laced with a hollow sweetness that made Maggie's stomach churn. Maggie had seen it all before, the way Cassie effortlessly enjoyed the privileges without understanding the cost, never once acknowledging the sacrifices Maggie had made. It was as if nothing had ever mattered to her. Cassie's careless posts were the final reminder, the last insult. But Maggie wasn't letting it get to her. She focused on the quiet work ahead of her. The moving company had been scheduled for the following week, but today, she began packing away the essentials. Not everything needed to go into storage, not yet. She focused on the things that had meaning: her late husband's old tools, the heirloom linens her grandmother had stitched, a few framed family photos. She moved slowly, methodically, as though each object required reverence. The rest of the house had already started to feel emptier, the walls almost echoing with their own silence. Maggie didn't mind. She had made her peace with it. The furniture that once felt familiar, the old armchair by the fireplace, the dining room table that had hosted family meals for years, would stay. But the memories would go, carefully packed away for a future that didn't include Cassie. As she moved through the house, sorting through drawers and shelves, Maggie's phone pinged. It was Cassie, a new post on Instagram. Maggie held the phone in her hand for a moment before opening the app, scrolling to Cassie's brunch photo. Cassie was sitting at a table outside, a mimosa in hand, the caption reading, "So grateful to live rent-free." Maggie stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the like button, but she didn't press it. Instead, she set the phone down. Cassie's world was so far removed from the truth that Maggie could feel the gulf between them growing wider with every passing day. The silence of the house settled deeper as Maggie sat down at her desk. She opened her email, her fingers steady as she typed out a short message to her estate lawyer. Subject: Update to Will. Dear Andrew, please make the following updates to my will. 1. Remove Cassie from any claim on the property located at 48 Magnolia Street. 2. Transfer all remaining assets to my name and update beneficiaries accordingly. 3. Ensure that any future estate taxes or costs related to the sale of the house are covered under my account. Thank you for handling this. Best, Maggie Hale. She clicked send without a second thought, the weight of her decision sinking in. As the email was sent, Derek appeared at the doorway, his worn boots softly clicking against the floor as he stepped inside. He had been moving furniture for hours now, but it didn't seem to bother him. His presence was always a quiet reassurance, the calm amidst her storm. He stood for a moment, watching Maggie as she worked. Then, with a gentle hesitation, he asked, "Are you sure about this, Maggie?" The question hung in the air, its simplicity cutting through the chaos of her thoughts. She looked up at him, her gaze unwavering. "I've never been sure," she said, the words heavy with finality. Derek didn't press further. He knew Maggie well enough to understand that once her mind was made up, there was no turning back. He nodded silently, his hands clasped together as he gave her space. She returned to her task, but her thoughts had already moved beyond the boxes, beyond the house. It wasn't just about the sale. It wasn't even about Cassie anymore. This was Maggie reclaiming her life, her dignity, her future. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the house seemed to grow quieter still. The shadows in the corners lengthened, the stillness now a tangible presence. Maggie finished packing the last of her keepsakes into a small box and placed it beside her desk. She stood, feeling the weight of everything she had just done, the weight of the past and the weight of her decision to move on. Cassie would never understand. But Maggie didn't need her to. The house was almost empty now, but Maggie wasn't. She wasn't done yet, and soon, she'd be free. The morning light was cold, filtered through the sheer curtains like dust, leaving the house bathed in a dull gray wash. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, the manila envelope resting before her like a quiet promise. The house felt hollow now, empty in a way that made her heart ache. But it was a hollow that would never be filled by Cassie's return. There was no going back. Cassie had not yet returned from her usual Sunday morning routine, the brunches and the social media posts that never seemed to stop. Maggie could picture her granddaughter now, laughing, oblivious to the reality that had already started to swallow her whole. Maggie's fingers traced the edge of the envelope, a flicker of something almost tender passing through her chest before it hardened again. The past weeks had been quiet in a way that terrified Maggie. The house had emptied, the spaces felt larger, and yet the silence felt like a trap that was slowly closing in on her. It was the last thing she had left to do. She had waited for the right moment to finalize it all, to make the final severing of ties. Maggie stood, the weight of the task settling on her as she walked toward the desk in the corner. The paperwork she'd received from the lawyer had been simple enough: straightforward instructions, clear intentions. She read the documents one last time, verifying everything was in place. There was no room for doubt now. Cassie's name would be removed from any claim on the house or its contents. Maggie had given everything for Cassie, but no longer. The house, the family heirlooms, the furniture that had sat in this house for generations, they would belong to Maggie, and Maggie alone. With steady hands, Maggie signed the final papers, her signature neat and deliberate. The weight of it felt strangely light, as though a part of her had been waiting for this day. She slipped the papers into the envelope, sealing it with a firm press of her thumb. There was no rush now, no reason to hurry. She glanced at the clock on the wall. Cassie would be home soon. The house would be just as she'd left it, except now, there would be no reason for Cassie to return. Maggie wasn't doing this out of malice. She was doing it to reclaim her own life. To finally take back the pieces that Cassie had thoughtlessly broken. Maggie took the envelope and set it by the door, her mind already several steps ahead. She moved through the house, quietly packing the last few essentials: a teapot, some cups, the quilt her mother had made. The things she could carry forward, the things that held real value. By the time Cassie's car pulled into the driveway, Maggie had already arranged the kitchen table. She had made breakfast, eggs and grits, just like Cassie liked. The smell lingered in the air, a soft comfort that was already beginning to feel distant, like a fading memory. The final breakfast. Cassie entered, her usual upbeat energy in tow, but there was a flicker of something else beneath her smile, a nervousness that Maggie knew all too well. Cassie's gaze swept the kitchen, then froze when she saw the manila envelope sitting on the table. "Grandma?" Cassie's voice was light, almost too light, as she approached. "What's this?" Maggie didn't answer immediately. She just let the silence hang between them, thick and suffocating. Cassie's eyes moved from the envelope to Maggie, and then back to the envelope again. She considered donating the house to charity, but quickly dismissed the thought. She couldn't do that. Not now. Not after everything Cassie had taken from her. No. Cassie needed to learn the cost of betrayal. She needed to understand that actions had consequences. The house would be sold. The money would go into Maggie's own account, untouched by anyone else's hands. Cassie didn't call again, but she showed up, as Maggie expected, just as the last of the movers left. She stormed through the door, her face flushed with irritation, her eyes wild. "Why haven't you been answering my calls?" Cassie demanded, her voice thick with entitlement, as though nothing had changed. "I've been trying to reach you for days. You can't just cut me out like this, Grandma." Maggie didn't stand to meet her, didn't even lift her gaze. "You sold everything that mattered to me, Cassie," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I've already moved on. You should too." Cassie's mouth opened and closed, words tumbling out without thought. But Maggie didn't listen anymore. She had heard it all before. The excuses, the pleas, the promises that never meant anything. This was the end of it. Cassie's shoulders slumped, and her eyes watered with the frustration she couldn't quite hide. "You're really just going to walk away from everything?" she whispered, her voice faltering for the first time. Maggie turned toward her, her gaze unwavering. "You've already walked away, Cassie. You just don't know it yet." Cassie opened her mouth to say something, but the words died on her lips. She was too late. And as she turned and walked out the door, Maggie felt something inside her settle. It wasn't relief. It wasn't joy. But it was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. She'd let go. And now, at last, she was free. The day was sharp and clear. The kind of winter morning that held both a bite in the air and a crisp, quiet beauty. The kind that felt like a turning point, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to shift. Maggie sat in the car outside the lawyer's office, her hands steady on the steering wheel. She had done this so many times, signed papers, made decisions. But today felt different. Today, it felt like the weight of all the years, the decisions, the sacrifices, was finally coming to rest. She didn't need to look at the house again. She had already walked through it one last time, the emptiness of each room now permanent. Her things were packed away, the furniture was gone. It was no longer her home. The thought had come to her the night before. Cassie would never come back here. Not for a holiday, not for a visit. Maggie had already closed the door. The young couple was waiting in the office, the couple who had fallen in love with the house. They were eager, eyes wide with excitement, their hands held tightly together as if the place, the house, held their future within it. Maggie couldn't help but watch them, their excitement almost contagious. They were making a new start, just as she was. It felt strange, but it also felt right. The lawyer, Andrew, greeted her with his usual polite smile, but today there was no small talk, no pleasantries. He simply gestured to the papers that sat in front of him, the official documents that would transfer ownership of the house into their hands. "Just your signature here, Maggie," he said, "and it's all done." Maggie took a breath and signed her name, each stroke of the pen marking the end of a chapter. The papers were handed off to the couple, their joy lighting up the room, but Maggie felt only a quiet peace. She wasn't sad. Not anymore. The relief came slowly, like the weight of something heavy being lifted from her shoulders. She glanced at the couple again. "Congratulations," she said, her voice steady. "I hope you make good memories here." The couple smiled at her gratefully, clearly overwhelmed. They seemed to sense that Maggie's words weren't just an ordinary greeting. Maggie stood up, ready to leave, but before she could make her way toward the door, she heard the sound of footsteps. Cassie. Maggie turned slowly, not surprised in the least. She had expected this. Of course, Cassie would show up. But she wasn't prepared for the way her granddaughter looked, disheveled, frantic, her hair falling loose around her shoulders, her face flushed with a mixture of anger and something else. Desperation, maybe. "Grandma!" Cassie's voice cracked, rising in pitch with the sharpness of a demand. "What is this? What's going on?" Her eyes darted around the room, landing on the signed papers. "I've been calling you for days. You can't just sell the house like this. You didn't even let me." Maggie raised her hand, her voice calm but firm. "It's done, Cassie. The house is sold. The papers are signed." Cassie's face twisted in disbelief. "You're just going to do this without telling me? Without explaining? I don't understand, Grandma." "Why?" Maggie looked her in the eye, the weight of the years between them thick in the silence. She could feel the tension, the unfinished business that had been brewing ever since she discovered the betrayal. But now, she was done. "You didn't value what I gave you, Cassie," Maggie said quietly, her voice unwavering. "You sold everything that mattered to me, so now you have nothing left to take." The words hit like a punch. Cassie's face drained of color as the full weight of what Maggie had said landed. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The anger in her eyes flickered, but underneath it, something else was there. Fear, regret, maybe even a flicker of understanding. Maggie didn't give her the chance to speak. She turned away, walking toward the door. There was nothing left to say. No explanation would ever be enough. As she stepped out into the cold air, Maggie felt the last of the weight lift. The house was gone, but so were the chains that had bound her to a past that could never be undone. She had done what she needed to do. And for the first time in a long time, Maggie felt free. The car started without hesitation, the engine humming smoothly. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror, the house growing smaller in the distance, just another memory fading into the past. Cassie would learn, in time, that trust couldn't be bought back. It had to be earned. But Maggie was done waiting. It was time to move forward. And as the house disappeared from view, she knew, without a doubt, that she was never going back. The weeks that followed the sale of the house unfolded with a strange, almost serene rhythm. Maggie settled into a new routine, one that was hers and hers alone. A quiet existence that felt like both a relief and a revelation. The world outside had not stopped turning, but for Maggie it felt as though time had slowed, the burden of the past lifting just enough to give her space to breathe, to think, to live. She had always loved painting, a passion she had buried years ago, between school meetings and family obligations, between the weight of expectations. But now, with the house behind her, Maggie took up her brushes again. The small studio in her new cottage, with its slanted ceilings and sun-dappled walls, became a refuge for her. A place where she could create without distractions. She painted still lifes at first, the soft curves of fruit, the simplicity of a single flower in a vase. Slowly, though, her subjects grew more personal. Landscapes of the gardens she had once tended with her husband, the edges of Charleston's quiet streets, the glow of twilight over the water. In the mornings, after her brush strokes had faded into a palette of rich hues, Maggie would step outside and tend to her garden. The small patch of soil she had cultivated was modest, yet it filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. There were roses, wildflowers, and a scattering of lavender. For the first time, it felt like something she could nurture just for herself. And then, there was June. The old friend, the one who had always understood the depth of Maggie's sacrifices, was more present than ever. They spent afternoons together, poking through antique shops, lingering over tea in the garden, reminiscing about days long gone. The simple pleasures that had once been overshadowed by the chaos of family life now felt like a treasure, delicate and precious. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch sipping iced tea, June raised an eyebrow as Maggie set her paintbrush down. "You know," June began, her tone teasing, "you were always an artist. It's about time you saw it, too." Maggie looked at her, her lips curving into a smile that felt unfamiliar, but not unwelcome. "Maybe I just needed to see it again, for myself." June chuckled, her sharp eyes twinkling. "Well, it's about time, and don't you forget it." Maggie's laughter joined June's, but there was something deeper in her heart, a quiet joy that had begun to bloom again. She was starting over, reclaiming the parts of herself she had forgotten. Every brushstroke, every flower she planted, was a small step in rediscovering the life she had set aside for so long, but not everything had gone quiet. Cassie's attempts to reconnect became more frequent, more desperate. Maggie received texts and emails, some polite, others demanding. "I need to talk to you," one message read. "Please, Grandma, I didn't mean for things to get like this. Can we meet?" Maggie knew, though, that there was nothing left to say. Cassie's desperation was transparent, but Maggie wasn't fooled. The apology, when it came, felt hollow. It was an attempt to rewrite the past, to erase the betrayal that had already been exposed. Maggie didn't respond to the texts. She didn't answer the phone calls. In the quiet of her cottage, in the warmth of her small, restored world, she found a peace that Cassie had long since sold away. One day, as the days grew longer and the sunlight softened, Maggie received a letter. She opened it slowly, her heart quickening as she read the contents. A local art gallery was offering her a chance to display her paintings. They had seen her work in a small shop window and were impressed by the depth of her style. Maggie read the letter twice, her mind reeling. She had painted for herself, for the joy of it, but now someone else saw value in it. Someone else believed in her art. She immediately called June, her voice filled with excitement. "They want to display my paintings. They actually want to showcase them." June's laughter rang out over the phone. "Of course they do. You've always had talent, Maggie. It was about time you realized it." Maggie smiled, leaning against the doorframe as she looked out over the garden. "I guess I just needed time. Time to let go. Time to see what I could still do." June's voice softened. "And now look at you. You're living again. Truly living." Maggie didn't respond right away, but the words were clear in her mind. She was living, not just existing. She had reclaimed herself, piece by piece. Then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed with a message from Cassie. This time, there were no demands, just an apology. "I'm sorry, Grandma, I messed up. Can we please talk? I want to make things right." Maggie stared at the screen for a moment, the words heavy on her heart. She thought of the house, the memories that had been broken, the trust that had been shattered. She thought of the life she was now building, piece by piece. She placed the phone down, turning back toward her art supplies. There would be no more words with Cassie. No more chances to try and fix what had already been lost. Her life was her own now, and that was more than enough. The phone rang again, the sound sharp in the quiet of Maggie's cottage. She had heard it several times today already, Cassie's name flashing across the screen, the voice messages piling up in her inbox. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, the light from the window casting long shadows over the room as dusk settled in. The house felt peaceful now, calm in a way it hadn't been for years, but the ringing phone was a reminder that some things, some people, refused to be ignored. Maggie didn't move. She let it ring, the sound fading into silence before it picked up again. Another message, and another. She had heard them all before. "Grandma, please pick up. I don't know what's going on, but I'm sorry. Please, I need to talk to you." Maggie exhaled softly, her fingers drumming lightly on the table, an unconscious rhythm she had adopted in the stillness of this new life. The messages were all the same, pleading, urgent, and full of regret. But Maggie didn't feel a flicker of guilt. She had already made her choice. The line between them had been drawn months ago, and no apology, no message, could undo what had been broken. Her thumb hovered over the screen, pausing as she looked at Cassie's name again. There was a part of her, a small, forgotten part, that wanted to answer, to hear her granddaughter's voice one last time. But Maggie had learned, in the weeks since the sale of the house, that some things were better left unsaid. With a steady hand, she pressed the block button. Cassie's number, her voice, her presence, all gone. The silence was thick and final, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Maggie felt something she hadn't expected: relief. She placed the phone back down, feeling the weight of the decision settle inside her. That chapter of her life was closed. There would be no more waiting, no more hoping, no more trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Cassie had made her choices, and Maggie had made hers. The silence between them was now complete. The evening passed slowly. Maggie lit a candle, its warm glow flickering in the dimming light of the living room. The air was crisp outside, but inside, the cottage felt like a sanctuary. She moved through the rooms, tidying up, her hands steady as she prepared for the quiet evening ahead. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees at the edge of the yard, but Maggie didn't notice. She was lost in the rhythm of her own world now, a world where she made the rules, where peace was something she could create for herself. Cassie's attempts to reach her weren't over. Maggie saw the messages later on social media. Long, drawn-out posts full of regret, full of begging for a second chance, for forgiveness. Each one more desperate than the last. Maggie didn't respond. She didn't even read them. It was as though Cassie's presence had become something distant, something she couldn't touch anymore. Maggie couldn't help but wonder, had her love ever been enough? She had given everything to raise Cassie, to love her, to give her the best of what she had. And yet, in the end, it hadn't been enough. Cassie had taken and taken, never once giving back. Not truly. Maggie stood by the window, looking out at the rolling hills of the countryside that stretched beyond her new home. The colors of the sky deepened into dusk, the world softening into the quiet of evening. She had spent years in that house with Cassie, pouring everything she had into their relationship, into the hope that it would mean something. But now, standing here in her new life, Maggie could see it for what it was. She had done all she could. With a sigh, Maggie turned away from the window and made her way to the small entryway where her coat hung. The evening was hers, but there was something she needed to do. Something that would fill the void Cassie had left behind. She opened the door and stepped outside, the crisp air biting at her skin as she made her way down the dirt path toward the local animal shelter. It had been a suggestion from June, one of those simple ideas that felt too small to matter, but Maggie had taken it to heart. She had always loved animals, always found peace in their company. And now, it was time to give something back. The shelter was quiet, the kind of quiet Maggie had come to appreciate. She spent the evening there, volunteering, helping care for the animals, cleaning their kennels, feeding them. There was something deeply healing about giving herself over to them, about tending to creatures who needed care, but would never ask for anything more. As she worked, the weight of everything that had come before her, everything with Cassie, seemed to lift. She realized with quiet certainty that this was enough. The shelter, the animals, the new routine she was building, it was her life now, and for the first time, it felt like a life she had chosen. When she returned home later that evening, her heart lighter than it had been in years, Maggie felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had finally let go. The silence she had enforced was no longer a punishment, it was a refuge. And in that silence, Maggie found the freedom she had been searching for all along. Maggie sat in the quiet of her new home, the gentle hum of the evening settling around her. The soft glow of the lamp beside her cast a warm circle of light on the table, where an old photo album lay open in front of her. The pages were yellowed with time, the edges curling slightly, as though the memories inside were reluctant to let go. Her fingers traced the photos, each one a snapshot of a life that had been lived fully. a life she had poured herself into. From the early days with her late husband to the years spent raising Cassie and her son. There, in black and white, was her husband in his prime, his smile wide and easy, his eyes full of mischief. She could almost hear his laughter again, like a melody she hadn't realized she missed so much until now. She turned the page and found a picture of their wedding day. The soft white gown she had worn, the pride in her husband's eyes as they stood together, young and full of dreams. They had been so certain back then of the life they would build. And they did. They built it together, brick by brick. Her eyes lingered on the photo, the man she had loved so deeply, the father of her children. But now, he was gone, his place in the world only occupied by memories. She felt the pang of that loss once more, sharp but softened by time. Then, the next page, and her son, as a young boy, sitting on the porch with his baseball glove in hand, waiting for his father to come home. She could almost hear his voice, echoing from the past, calling for his father to play catch with him. Those were the days she would never forget, the days when her family had been whole, when the world seemed possible. But then came the emptiness, the silence, the betrayal. Maggie had given everything for her family, for Cassie, and in the end, it hadn't been enough. She closed the album gently and set it aside, her heart heavy with the weight of all the good times she had lost, the love, the moments that could never be recaptured. She rose from her chair, moving slowly across the room toward her writing desk. It was a small wooden thing, worn smooth by years of use. She had kept it in her new home as a reminder of what she had once hoped to accomplish. As she sat down, her pen hovered over the paper for a long moment. What did she want to say to Cassie now? What was left to say? Maggie didn't know if Cassie would ever understand, but she had to try. She had to write, even if the words never reached her granddaughter. My dear Cassie, I've been thinking about you, about us, about everything we've been through. I know that things have been difficult, and I know I haven't been able to give you what you wanted, what you expected. But I want you to remember the good times. Remember when you were a little girl, running around the house, full of joy, full of love. I remember those days like they were yesterday. You were my world. You still are, in a way. But things have changed. I can't keep living in the past, hoping for a future that might never come. I gave everything to raise you, Cassie. I loved you like my own, like my daughter. And even though things went wrong, I don't regret the love I gave you. You were worth it, every moment of it. But now, I have to let go. I've let go of the house, of the memories that kept me tied to a past that only brought pain. But I won't let go of the good things we shared. I won't forget that little girl with the stuffed rabbit, the one who filled my heart with so much hope. I hope one day you can forgive me for what I've done. But I can't keep waiting for you to change. I can't keep pretending that things will go back to how they were. I'm sorry if I've hurt you, but I have to move on. I hope you find what you need, but I can't give you any more of myself. Not anymore. With love, Maggie placed the pen down, her heart heavy with the words she had just written. It was the first time in a long while she felt as though she had said everything she needed to say, even if Cassie would never read it. This letter wasn't for her granddaughter. It was for Maggie, for her own peace. She folded the letter carefully, setting it aside. The weight in her chest seemed to lift just slightly, like a pressure had been relieved. Later that afternoon, Maggie went out into the yard. The garden she had started was growing slowly, but it was hers, just as this new life was hers. She knelt down by the patch of soil, her fingers working the earth, planting flowers where once only weeds had grown. She planted roses for her husband, lavender for her son, and daisies for herself. It was her memorial, a small one, but one that would stay. She had finally found a way to honor the love and the losses she had endured. As the sun dipped low, casting the yard in golden light, Maggie sat back on her heels, surveying the garden. It was simple, but beautiful. And it was hers. She smiled, the peace of the moment settling over her, and for the first time in years, Maggie felt whole again. She had done everything she could for Cassie. She had loved with everything she had. But now it was time to focus on herself. And that, for the first time, felt like enough. The envelope sat on Maggie's kitchen table, unopened for days. It had come in the mail, the handwriting unmistakable. Cassie's looping script, hurried, desperate, just like the tone of her voice had been in those last messages. Maggie had seen it there, lying on the table each morning, the weight of it pulling at her like a shadow she couldn't escape. The letter had remained unopened, sitting in the same spot for days, because Maggie wasn't ready to hear what it might say. But today, the stillness of the house had an urgency to it, like something unsaid needed to be voiced. Maggie took a deep breath and reached for the letter. The paper crinkled under her fingers, a simple thing, but somehow it felt monumental. She turned it over, her thumb brushing against the seal as she tore it open slowly, deliberately. She unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the words, each sentence a jagged reminder of all the things she had tried to forget. Dear Grandma, I can't begin to express how sorry I am for everything that's happened. I know I hurt you, and I know that I've taken so much from you. I sold your jewelry, and for that, I will regret it for the rest of my life. I can't tell you how much I wish I could undo what I've done, but I can't. I understand if you never want to speak to me again, but I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I don't want to lose you. I just want a chance to make things right. I know I can't change the past, but I want to do better. For you, for me, for everyone. Please, if there's any chance left, I'd like to talk. I miss you so much. With all my love, Maggie placed the letter down slowly, her hand trembling ever so slightly. The words weren't what she had expected. They were raw, laced with an honesty that hadn't been there before. For a moment, she simply sat there, staring at the paper, as if waiting for something to shift, for the words to settle inside her. Cassie's apology was heartfelt. There was no doubt about that. But Maggie knew this wasn't just about the jewelry. It was about trust, about years of giving without receiving, of loving without being loved in return. Maggie had loved Cassie like a daughter. But in the end, Cassie had never truly understood the depth of that love, had never fully appreciated the sacrifices Maggie had made. And that was the real betrayal. The jewelry, the lies, the empty promises. They were just symptoms of a larger wound. Her fingers traced the edge of the letter again, but her thoughts weren't with the apology. They were with the life she had built. The years spent trying to make something out of nothing, trying to salvage a relationship that had been crumbling beneath her feet. Maggie had given everything for Cassie, and it had never been enough. As she sat there, the weight of the letter in her hands, Maggie realized something. She couldn't keep living in the past, hoping for a future that could never be. Cassie had taken so much from her already. But what was more painful than the stolen jewelry, the betrayal of trust, was the years of unappreciated love, the years spent trying to fill an emptiness that could never be filled. She had given everything for Cassie, but Cassie had never truly seen it. Maggie closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the slow burn of anger rise, tempered by the calm she had found in the last few months. The house was gone. The jewelry was gone. But the years spent raising Cassie, the years spent loving her, were hers to keep. Maggie picked up her pen and began to write, her thoughts clear and steady. Cassie, I've read your letter and I appreciate the apology. I know it wasn't easy for you to write, and I'm glad you've come to understand the hurt you caused me. But I need you to understand something. It wasn't just the jewelry. It wasn't just the things you took from me. It was the trust, the love, the part of me that I gave you, expecting that you would value it. You didn't. And that's what I can't forgive. You didn't see what I was giving you. You didn't understand that the sacrifices I made were not just for you, but for us, for our family, for a future that never came. I raised you like my own, Cassie, and for years I thought that was enough. But it wasn't. You wanted more, but you never gave anything back. I've done everything I could for you. But I can't keep waiting for you to change. I can't keep hoping for something that will never happen. Selling the house wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming something for myself. I had to let go of the past, let go of the person I thought you were, so I could move on. I've already moved on, Cassie, and I won't look back anymore. Maggie set the pen down, her heart heavy, but lighter than it had been in years. The decision had been made. She had said everything she needed to say. She didn't need to send the letter. She didn't need Cassie to understand. This was her closure, the final step in letting go. With a deep breath, Maggie folded the letter, tucking it away. There would be no more trying to fix what had already been broken. The silence between them was final now. And Maggie was free. Maggie had spent so many years wrapped up in the past, in memories, in trying to salvage something from the wreckage of her relationship with Cassie. But now Maggie gave her a small, measured smile. "Thank you for coming, Cassie," she said, her voice calm, steady. "I'm glad you're here." Cassie's face twisted with the weight of what Maggie had said. She opened her mouth to speak again, but Maggie held up a hand, gently stopping her. "I've learned a lot over the years," Maggie continued, her voice softer now, filled with a wisdom she hadn't possessed before. "And one of the things I've learned is that I can't carry the weight of the past anymore. I've given you everything I had, Cassie. I've loved you with all my heart. But I can't keep waiting for something that's not coming." Cassie's face fell, her lips trembling. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered, the words filled with pain. "I don't know what to do." Maggie nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I don't need you to fix it, Cassie. I've already done that for myself." For a long moment they stood there, the space between them filled with the unspoken truth that had always lingered just beneath the surface. Maggie had let go, and now, for the first time, she was free. Cassie blinked, her eyes glossed with tears, but Maggie didn't reach out. She couldn't. She had already moved on. As Cassie turned and walked away, Maggie didn't feel the pang of regret she had expected. She felt only a quiet peace. She had built something new, something for herself. And that, finally, was enough. Maggie turned back to the guests, her eyes meeting June's across the room. Her friend's smile was knowing, proud. Maggie smiled back, the weight of the years lifting from her shoulders. The future, at last, was hers to create. Maggie sat in the soft, late afternoon light that streamed through her kitchen window, the room bathed in golden warmth. It was a feeling she had come to cherish, the stillness, the quiet that now filled her life. She had spent years in a constant state of motion, always caring for others, always putting her needs last. But now, she was learning to savor the moments of peace, to relish the simplicity of being. The house was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of the trees outside. Maggie ran a hand over the wooden table where she had spent so many hours. Hours spent in worry, in love, in the weight of responsibilities that she no longer had to carry. It had been months since she had let go of the house, of Cassie, of the life she had spent so many years building. Now, standing in the kitchen of her small cottage, she realized how much she had grown, how much she had learned to appreciate her own company, her own choices. For the first time, Maggie was truly living for herself. The doorbell rang and Maggie's heart lifted. It was June, her constant companion through it all, the friend who had never left her side. Maggie opened the door to find her standing there, a warm smile on her face and a bottle of wine in her hand. "Thought I'd bring some celebration with me," June said, stepping inside. "You're cooking tonight, right?" Maggie chuckled. "I am indeed. A small gathering tonight. Good friends, good food, a little bit of joy for all we've been through." The evening passed in a blur of laughter, the sound of glasses clinking together, and the steady hum of conversation. Maggie had invited a few close friends, people who had seen her through the hardest of times, who had offered her support when she needed it most. They gathered around the table, the warmth of the candles flickering in the soft evening light, sharing stories, jokes, and memories. The simple pleasures, the ones she had so often overlooked, now filled her heart. As she watched her friends, Maggie couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led her here. She thought about how much she had loved Cassie, how much she had sacrificed, and how it had shaped her. But now, as she sat among people who truly appreciated her, who loved her for who she was, Maggie realized that she had spent so many years giving without receiving, and it had taken its toll. It was time to focus on her own happiness. She had loved Cassie with everything she had, and though the love had been real, it hadn't been enough to hold them together. But Maggie had found new love, in herself, in the life she was building, in the friends who surrounded her. She didn't need to wait for Cassie to come around, to apologize or make amends. She had already done the work of healing, and now she could finally move forward. Later that evening, as the guests lingered, Maggie went to her desk and found the letter, the one from Cassie that had arrived just a few days ago. She had set it aside, unsure of what it might say, unsure of whether it was something she could face. She opened it slowly, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. The same handwriting, the same desperate tone. "Grandma, I know I've hurt you beyond repair, and I'm sorry. I've come to realize the depth of my actions and how much I've taken from you. I never understood what I was doing until it was too late. I wish I could make it right, but I know now that I can't. I'm so sorry. I miss you so much." Maggie set the letter down, her eyes briefly closing as she reflected on the words. It was clear that Cassie had finally understood the weight of her actions, that she had realized the damage she had caused. But for Maggie, it wasn't enough. She had already said goodbye, already let go. She had already moved on. She read the letter again, the words sinking in. Cassie was sorry, but Maggie knew that the time for reconciliation had passed. The damage had been done, and while the apology was genuine, it couldn't change what had happened. Maggie placed the letter carefully in her drawer, tucking it away, knowing that it was her closure, the final chapter in the story of their relationship. There was no anger in her heart, only a deep, lingering sadness for what could have been. But that was a sadness she had learned to live with. She didn't need Cassie to make things right. She had already done that for herself. As Maggie sat back down at the table with her friends, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. The evening had unfolded with ease, the warmth of companionship surrounding her. She had found what she needed. She had found her life, her joy, her peace. And for the first time, Maggie knew that she was exactly where she needed to be. She had chosen this life, and it was enough. Maggie stood in front of her latest canvas, the deep blues and vibrant oranges swirling together in a soft haze of light. She had come a long way from the woman who had once tucked her brushes away, afraid of what the world might think. Now, with each stroke, she felt more connected to herself, more alive in a way she hadn't been in years. Her art business was flourishing. It started small, a few pieces hanging in local cafes, some work in regional shows. But soon her name was becoming more familiar in the small but growing art community of Charleston. People came to see her paintings, asked for commissioned works, and, for the first time in her life, Maggie realized she was no longer invisible. She wasn't just the one who gave, the one who cared. She was the artist. She was the creator of beauty. One afternoon, as she was preparing a new collection for an upcoming show, her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, an unfamiliar number. Curious, she answered. Maggie Hale? A voice on the other end asked, warm yet professional. Yes, Maggie said, wiping her hands on a towel. Who's this? This is Claire Harper, curator at the Charleston Museum of Art. We've been following your work and are very impressed by the depth and emotion in your pieces. We'd love to showcase your collection in an upcoming exhibit. Would you be interested? Maggie's heart skipped a beat. The museum? She had never imagined something like this happening. A part of her wanted to brush it off as a dream, to think it wasn't real. But it was. The call was real. Of course, Maggie said, her voice steady but filled with an emotion she couldn't contain. I would love that. Thank you. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Maggie poured herself into her work, refining her pieces, ensuring that each one felt like a reflection of her journey. When the day of the exhibition arrived, the museum was buzzing with anticipation. Maggie stood in the center of the room, surrounded by her work, her heart swelling with a pride she had never allowed herself to feel. Her journey from the quiet, withdrawn woman she had been to this moment of recognition was beyond anything she had imagined. It wasn't just about the art, it was about reclaiming herself. She was no longer defined by her sacrifices or her losses. She had created this life for herself, one built on independence, on resilience, and on a deep well of self-respect. But as the night went on, as people admired her work and discussed the stories behind each painting, Maggie couldn't ignore the feeling of eyes on her. She turned and saw her, Cassie. She was standing at the far end of the room, watching Maggie from a distance. There was no denying it. Cassie had changed. She was still the granddaughter Maggie had raised, but there was a heaviness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Cassie approached slowly, her steps hesitant, as if unsure how to enter this new world Maggie had created. Maggie could feel the weight of the years between them, the distance that had come with every unspoken word and every broken promise. Cassie stopped in front of her, her voice low. Grandma, I can't believe this. Your work, it's incredible. Maggie nodded, her expression calm, though her heart stirred with something she couldn't name. Thank you, Cassie. It's been a long time coming. I've been thinking about you a lot, Cassie continued, her voice wavering slightly. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever explain, and I regret everything. I was selfish. I was blind to what you gave me. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I don't know how to make up for it, but I want to try. Maggie studied her granddaughter for a moment, the words hanging between them. The apology was real, and yet, it felt too little, too late. The damage had already been done. Maggie gave her a small, measured smile, her voice calm. I appreciate your apology, Cassie. But the truth is, I've already done the work. I've already healed, and I've already moved on. And for the first time in a long time, I'm at peace. Cassie looked down, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered, her words heavy with regret. Maggie shook her head, her voice firm. You don't have to. I've already fixed it for both of us. I've learned to live without carrying the weight of the past. Cassie stood still for a long moment, the silence stretching between them, but Maggie didn't reach for her. She had already said everything she needed to say. This was it. This was the end. I'm proud of you, Maggie said softly, her gaze softening, but there was no turning back. But I can't carry the weight of our past anymore, Cassie, and I won't. Cassie's shoulders slumped, her expression broken as she turned to leave, her footsteps soft but purposeful. Maggie watched her go, her heart heavy but resolute. There was no anger in her, no bitterness, just the quiet sadness of what had been lost. A sadness she had made peace with long ago. As the night wore on, Maggie stood in front of her paintings, the room buzzing with excitement. And yet, in that moment, the world felt still. She had come so far, not just as an artist, but as a woman who had finally reclaimed her life. She had given Cassie everything she could, but now she was living for herself. Maggie smiled, a small but genuine smile as she gave her speech. She dedicated her work to the life she had built, one of independence, resilience, and self-respect. When I raised my granddaughter like my own daughter, I gave her everything. But when she sold my jewelry, I sold the house she slept in and reclaimed my peace forever. As the applause filled the air, Maggie knew that her legacy was not defined by what she had lost, but by what she had built, for herself, by herself.